The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to a special webinar that the National Farm to School Network is hosting today. This is Helen Dumbalis, the Senior Director of Programs and Policy with NFSN. And I say special webinar because we do offer a monthly webinar series called Trending Topics and Farm to School. You can check out the information about those on our website, farmtoschool.org. But today's webinar is a special webinar where we have teamed up with a group of nutrition students at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. These graduate students are helping us think about and gear up for the Child Nutrition Act Reauthorization. We are, as an organization, early in the 2020 strategic planning process for our 2020 to 2022 strategic plan. And early on in that process, at our annual meeting in April in Cincinnati, we heard from our core and supporting partners, you all that are attendees today, about interest in going, quote, upstream with the state additional reimbursement or incentive model, such as Michigan's 10 cents a meal, DC's Healthy Schools Act and Healthy Tots Act, New Mexico's fresh fruit and vegetable grown program. So really taking what's happened in various states around the country and scaling that up and doing some sort of federal campaign to get more money for school meal and child nutrition programs through incentivizing local procurement. So the students have spent this semester looking into models and options and have done some research for us to really help us think through what it would look like to have more federal funding for school meals and child nutrition programs. So I'm going to, with that, turn it over to them and just want to extend a huge amount of gratitude to the team for doing the research that they've done. And we're delighted to hear from you all now about your findings and your recommendations for NFSN going forward.
Thank you. So my name is Stephanie Kennedy, and on behalf of my team here at UNC, I'd just like to thank you for inviting us to speak on today's webinar. Actually, just a quick correction, we're actually a mixed team of graduate and undergraduate students. So before I begin, I will let my team members quickly introduce themselves.
I'm Julia Wonder, an undergraduate.
I'm Parisa Shazadi, an undergraduate.
I'm Arjun Kashava, I'm an undergraduate.
And I'm Janessa Sladen-Dew.
So throughout the semester, we've been researching a variety of farm-to-school policies and practices in states across the country. Specifically, again, we looked at New Mexico, New York, Texas, Oregon, Michigan, and Washington, D.C. Upon further investigation of the structures of each state, we found that the most compelling examples tended to be in school districts that implemented farm-to-school programs in ways that were uniquely adapted to their own setting. So these diverse implementations at the local level appear to reflect the differences in structure of state policy and how farm-to-school programs can be adapted to work most effectively in markets with varying needs. So as we present our findings, we'll be discussing benefits and challenges that stakeholders face in implementing farm-to-school programs, asking such questions as, how do these programs benefit school children? What challenges are faced by school districts and administration? And how do local farmers fare across these different styles of implementation? And additionally, for a global perspective and comparison, we'll touch on farm-to-school programs in other countries to imagine what a unified federal program might look like here for us. So as a reminder, there will be time at the end of the presentation during which we'll be more than happy to answer any questions. So with that, I'll hand it off to my colleague Julia to begin our discussion of state-level programs.
Hello all, I'd like to begin with starting to talk about New Mexico's Farm to School program. New Mexico's program is known as New Mexico Grown. It is a statewide push for farm to school in New Mexico coming from the Public Education Department. The government will spend more than $400,000 to serve more than 250,000 students through supporting farm to school programs across the state. Currently, 56 school districts and charter schools are receiving money from the state for this program, and it is the first time for 27 of these districts to participate. The amount of money allocated to each school depends on their specific student need. All schools that applied were rewarding funding, so that means that all 218 school food authorities across the state have been awarded for this year. In addition, more than 50% of schools are using 10 to 40% of their own food budgets to purchase more locally grown foods. New Mexico Grown is an important program to the state because 82% of New Mexico's school students are eligible for USDA free or reduced cost lunches, and more than 25% of children are considered food insecure. Additionally, the state's residents experience many nutrition-related chronic diseases. We believe that the farm to school programs can help begin the process of strong and healthy nutritional habits with the students. New Mexico is also making strides elsewhere in the school lunch scene. On April 13th of 2017, Governor Susana Martinez banned school lunch program shaming policies that punish students who are unable to pay for food. But we do need to address the limitations of farm to school in New Mexico. These farm to school programs are only seen as supplementary. There's belief that the state could never sustain itself locally because of the low availability and small range of foods that can be grown in the climate. Still, we are going to look at the success stories that we have seen. The most common foods that are seen in the student population include meats, cheeses, chilies, and pinto beans, which is very representative of the state's agriculture business. Schools have a variety of approaches to farm to school. Some shoot for 50 to 70% source days once a year, while others plan a weekly program highlighting local foods. The Albuquerque public school system has 90 school gardens by itself. But most importantly and most strong is the Santa Fe Public Schools farm to school system. Santa Fe Public Schools have been buying local since 2001, so for almost 18 years now. The nutrition department delivers lunch to 13,000 students daily, and Santa Fe obtains most of their foods from the Santa Cruz farm and greenhouses near Espanola for the past 15 years. This year, they have received $22,000 through the State New Mexico Grown Initiative. And in both the spring and the fall, they host 100% locally sourced food days to celebrate the local agriculture industries. Now we are going to move on to a different state. We're going to talk about New York. The New York State Farm to School program was established in 2015. Since then, the state has collectively set aside more than $1.8 million for programs in 164 school districts. The New York State educational institutions will receive an increased reimbursement rate from 5.9 cents a lunch to 25 cents per lunch, and the next year, if they are able to purchase at least 30% of their foods from New York State farms this year. This is an entitlement program, meaning that any of the school districts who qualify and meet this 30% benchmark will receive this increased funding for the next year. Governor Cuomo has signed off on this initiative at a projected cost of $10 million annually. Additionally, schools can also apply for up to $100,000 in grants funding for the development of their farm to school programs. This money would not be spent on the food that they would purchase from the farms, but actually on developing those relationships between the schools and the farms. For this, Governor Cuomo has set aside $1.5 million. Now we would like to look at how these are actually carrying out in New York schools. The pilot that was run in the northern country in the northeast part of New York State saw more than $188,000 spent on local food in St. Louis and Jefferson counties within the first year. Participation expanded from 15 to 22 farms and from 16 to 19 of the total 20 schools, reaching an estimated 24,000 students. In the Rosendale Elementary School in Schenectady County, they purchased potatoes from Roots and Wisdom, a local grower, and hosted Make Your Own Baked Potato Day, where kids were able to enjoy creating their own baked potato, and awareness was raised of the local agriculture in the area. Additionally, the potatoes were purchased at the same price as they could have been from the distributor that the school usually negotiates with. Greenville Central School District in Greene County buys their produce from Schneer's Sunset Orchard at a competitive price. The produce is delivered once a week and includes fruit, squash, and also value-added products, including cider and donuts. It provides an extra market for the orchard and also increases exposure to their existence. And then the Averill Park Central School District in Rensselaer County, this food services director partnered with the Farm at Christie's Barn to provide fruits and vegetables to cafeterias. Additionally, they scheduled elementary school field trips to this farm so the school children can learn more about their program. There is a high school garden project going on, and the staff has remarked that they do not mind taking the few extra steps to prepare the food for their children. A question that needs to be considered with New York State is how realistic is this 30% benchmark? For high needs district, they would like to see the 30% just applied to the lunch cost, not all of the food budget. This is because they are most likely also providing food for breakfast, after school snacks, and summer meals, making it difficult to reach 30% overall. Additionally, it has been noted that when there is a 30% benchmark and it is not viewed as realistic, institutions will receive their produce elsewhere because they're discouraged and are unwilling to try to reach it if they will not meet the benchmark. But it is believed that if there is a beginning process of just starting to buy in, and especially support from the schools, farmers will be willing to negotiate prices with the schools. Alan DeVoe of DeVoe's Rainbow Orchards and Half Moon can attest to the power of selling to schools. For over 40 years, DeVoe has been selling to Shenandoah, Mechanicsville, Waterford Half Moon, and Stillwater school districts. And he remarks that the school districts provide a more consistent, dependable demand than other large wholesale buyers.
I'm going to focus now on Texas and Michigan, looking more at the specifics of the program and how people have responded in the case of Michigan. So first, looking at Texas, the farm to school program in Texas is an intensive program. In 2009, Texas established the Interagency Farm to School Task Force. The purpose of this task force was to oversee the availability of locally grown produce to be put into the farm to school program in the state. They were in charge of making sure families and local produce were getting to the facilities and being produced. It is an inclusive task force, as it includes representatives from the Texas Department of Agriculture, Texas Education Agency, and Department of State Health Services. The types of representation are important because most demographics are being voiced versus just being one specific person in charge of everything. The program also established a coordinator within the Texas Department of Agriculture, so there is also representation from there. Furthermore, they also hired a full-time farm-to-school specialist for the program to be in charge of it solely. Overall, the program established correspondence in a multitude of positions. One of the things that makes the Texas farm-to-school program special is, aside from being solely a farm-to-school program, the program in Texas also provides local produce to prisons and hospitals. The task force is also in charge of non-school farm-to-school programs such as the prison and hospital one. This makes the audience to which the program becomes more relevant, increase, and more people probably willing to support it. Michigan also follows an intensive program. They have an incentive program, as most know, for 10 cents per meal in farm-to-school programs. Michigan did a good job of presenting how their farm-to-school program has changed over the past 10 years in the perceptions of the community and people involved in it. Overall, support from local communities has increased. In the Michigan program, participants have said that they prefer locally sourced food items instead of canned or frozen lunches for school lunch programs. Because of this, it does cost a little more to get locally sourced produce to schools, but because people support it, there's no dissent towards paying extra to be able to provide it, which is why they have the funding for it. I was also able to find some quotes from people in Michigan and that are involved in the school lunch program and how they felt about the farm to school lunch program. From a first grader, they said that it was so good their taste buds went to town, which shows that the students in the farm to school program are enjoying the foods. A food service director said that the kids are asking about what new fruits and veggies are going to be introduced to them. So they're looking forward to what is next to come and aren't grossed out by the farm to school foods. And finally, a farmer said that kids have come up to his booth at the farmer's market asking for foods that they've eaten in their farm to school lunch programs, such as the parsnips, which they hadn't had before, before they had it in school. All of these show that the kids are enjoying eating the healthier, locally sourced options. Their excitement towards the program shows that it is effective in the way Michigan has approached it.
I'll be talking about Oregon next. To start, I'd like to have some quick facts. So in Oregon, Farm to School has generated over $21 million for local communities, created over 100 jobs, and currently feeds over 230,000 children. Since 2011, the Oregon State Legislature has allocated over $10 million to farm to school programs to help start gardens. And in the state of Oregon, over 45% of schools have school gardens. So as you can see, Oregon supports farm to school in a majority of ways, specifically financially. One thing I found on Oregon's Farm to School website was a 5-step process on how to advocate for new farm to school programs. So I'll run through that real quick. The first one was to figure out who your local legislators are and identifying possible partners at a school you want to target. Once you've identified the school, you want to find approximately 3 different people. You want to know an organizer for farm to school. You want to know a principal or an assistant principal who's ready to authorize the program, as well as a cook or nutrition director who will help support the program. After that, you need to investigate dates to meet with legislator or congressman or a congresswoman. This was specifically stated because politicians often, their decisions on programs such as farm to school is dependent on time. There are certain times where they're sometimes too busy to look at programs like this, and sometimes where they're more than happy to support. After that, you want to develop a draft on how you plan on executing a farm to school program, and then be prepared when you contact your legislators. In Washington, D.C., there have been a few policy actions recently. The Sustainable Act of D.C. Was in 2011, and by 2032, they hope to have additional 20 acres of land for growing food. Although 20 acres of land doesn't seem like that much, in the capital of D.C. is a lot of land and can be used to grow a lot of food for students in the local area. They want to ensure that 75% of residents live within a quarter mile, have healthy and affordable food supplies, as well as produce/obtain 25% of food within a 100-mile radius. In addition, the Healthy Tots Act of 2014 adopted higher nutritional standards, made DC the first state or district to allow allocate local funding to pay for a 3rd meal instead of just breakfast, lunch, and a snack through the child and adult care food program, as well as they established grant funding for physical activity, gardens, nutrition, education, and farm to school preschool activities. Some of the tips that they had for advocating for food justice and advancing food justice in the country, since it is the capital of DC, they had a couple tips. These include focusing on transformational changes at the systems level, building bridges between government, private, and communities and nonprofits, developing advocacy channels to amplify marginalized voices, curating best practices and leveraging existing infrastructure, and responding to community needs through competent leadership. So as you can see, the capital of DC is doing a lot in terms of advocating for more farm to school programs, and these are just a couple tips that they had on their website.
So just to touch on some examples that are maybe not directly relevant to the United States, but I think they set a really good example of what the future of farm to school programs could look like. So starting in Brazil, they decentralized their program in the mid-1990s, and they decided to dedicate funding to state students based on the number of students in each education department, and each education department controls the accounts of the purchasing of food, but each school crafts its individual report back to the state. Legislation currently, or passed in 2000, that said that at least 30% of the food purchased for the program must be from small family farmers. And the PNAE is currently funneling about $500,000 into local farmers supplying fresh fruits and vegetables and other products to these schools. This is currently feeding about 42 million school children, and they're currently holding a goal of being a zero hungry program. So an interesting aspect of their program is that farmers bid directly with city governments to supply local schools, and through like a structured demand program, they need a lot of like community incentive and community involvement in order for this program to continue. But as of right now, it's still probably one of the most impressive programs in the international scale to have like a federal program that's feeding farm to school. In addition, Rome, Italy has had recently implemented a new program where 70% of their food that's served in school cafeterias must be organic. The city of Rome is funding this. So although the average cost of these meals would be €5, through subsidization from the city, it has gone down to under €3. And then for low income students, that is like under, I think it's just over $1 or €1. On top of like the subsidization for organic foods, the food plan has like a very elaborate guidelines. So including in their dietary things, there's no deep fried food. There has to be like a starchy dish, main course, 2 vegetables and a fresh fruit. And menus have to be sent home to all the parents of these schools in order to make sure there's no meal overlap, in order to cover the basis on like nutritional standards. My other examples are from like Sweden, Norway, Finland. These countries are all through social welfare services, so this is probably not an overly achievable goal in the moment in the United States, but any student that is enrolled that is up to the age of 18 years will have free lunches through their educational programs. On top of these mandates, they also require that lunch breaks have a certain time limit, and that all of the nutritional standards, that each meal fulfills approximately 1/3 of the pupil's daily food requirements. The only example I have of a country that is currently looking at implementing farm to table or farm to school, but hasn't officially done it yet, is Canada, and they're looking at actually taxing sugary beverages and then taking those funds and putting them towards a federal farm to school program. So I think that's everything from us. So we've left at least like 5 minutes here at the end for you guys to have any questions. So we'll open the floor to you guys and hear what you guys have to say.
Great. And wow, thank you all. That was incredibly comprehensive, and I really appreciate you all including not only state examples from the US, but also those international examples. That was really helpful to see different models. So folks, if you have questions, go to your GoToWebinar control panel and you can type those in. And I'm not seeing any right now, so I'll start off with a question. With the Brazil example, am I correct in remembering that Brazil provides universal meals, meaning that any child who wants to eat the school meals is able to do so free of charge?
Sorry, I muted myself. Yes, so they currently have a universal program, and all the funding is through the government. So it's any child that is going through a school program, but because of like their educational policies there, it was like hard to determine like what exactly is like whether full enrollment or partial enrollment was necessary in order for them to have it. But across the board, it was like under 18 years old, universal food program.
Great, thank you. Still not seeing any questions, so I'll throw out another one. And Lacey, please feel free to do the same. So as you all just indicated, there are lots of different models and ways of going about incentivizing through policy farm to school activity, especially the local procurement. Did you all as a student research team come to any recommendations, or do you, in what you found, do you have any recommendations for NFSN on best practices or models, or further questions that we should be asking ourselves as we consider a federal campaign like this?
I think that the sections that I've done between New York and New Mexico can demonstrate that it's not best to have one universal program, because it is really dependent on the different agricultural state that the state has itself. So I think a 30% program is more realistic to be achieved in New York when they have a longer growing season or more land that can be used. But I think in New Mexico, with the drier climate, it is more difficult, so a 30% benchmark would not be attainable. I mentioned earlier that it's seen as only supplementary, whereas in New York, there's a real belief that it can be pushed through for many schools to attain. So I would say from those examples, I don't think there is one universal thing for the United States to do, but maybe programs that are specific to the agriculture of each state would be more appropriate.
Great, thank you. Still not seeing any questions, so I'm going to keep firing away at you all, but folks, attendees, please feel free to type your questions in the question box. So the National Farm to School Network, and I think I shared this with you all early on, over the summer developed a programs and policy racial and social equity assessment tool. So it's essentially a tool that we can use as we're thinking about policy advocacy work or other programming to ensure that we're really maximizing our impact on advancing equity. So going back to this Brazil example, I'm seeing here that it's not just local, but it's local and from small family farmers. Did you find any other examples in your research that got more specific than just local? Because when the staff of NFSN did a test run of our equity assessment tool with this federal campaign in mind, that was one of the key things that rose to the top for us, is that by specifying, you know, a minimum % local or 10 cents for local or whatever it is, yes, we're impacting the local economy, but if we really want to advance equity, that there's more that we could do specifically in the legislation, such as saying we want to support small farmers or small and mid-sized family farmers or socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers or farmers of color. So curious if y'all found any other examples aside from Brazil that got more specific.
I believe in my research for New York, especially with the Cornell Cooperative Extension, I believe it's called, and other local food policy councils in New York and also in Mexico. There have been organizations that their purpose is to support local farmers. So not necessarily just through the Farm to School program, but their sole purpose is to find the local farmers and provide services for them on how to obtain the tools that they need and also the resources that they need. And I think also to give lectures on best growing practices and how to set up points of sale. So if you would like, I can send that information your way. I don't have it ready right now.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you. Well, I know we are just about at the end of time. I see one question that did come in. Did any of the state legislation include funding for promotion or technical assistance to support schools in purchasing local foods?
Yes, in the New York side, it was estimated that 10 million would be for actually purchasing foods, but if you see the second or the last big bullet point, schools can apply for $100,000, and this isn't for purchasing the foods, it's for setting up the relationships, and in addition to setting up the relationships, making sure that they can come through with a source for actually taking the food from the produce and the farmers to the schools.
Great. Well, I know we are at the top of the hour. Cannot express enough gratitude. Thank you all for such a comprehensive look at the various models. This will be especially informative as we head into 2019 and start to think about our future federal policy efforts. And I'll certainly follow up with the student team over email as well to wrap up this project. And thanks to all of the core and supporting partners that joined today. And to you all for really inspiring this webinar by bringing this up and raising this as an important issue for NFSN to consider as part of our next strategic planning process. So with that, we will wrap up. And thanks again to the student team. There is contact information for them if you all have any follow-up questions. Take care, everyone, and thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.